Hi, everyone. I'm Sam, and today I'm hosting one of our friends and co-investors, Dave Messina, on the Human 3 podcast. I'm doing it solo today, so wish me luck. Dave Messina is founder and general partner of Pioneer Fund's Future of Health Fund, a fund of over 100 YC healthtech alumni investing in top health startups. He's spent over 25 years in healthcare and has been leading healthcare investments at Pioneer Fund since 2019. Dave has led over 100 deals and has invested in companies including Gilgamesh Pharmaceutical, Assort Health, Freshpaint, and PostEra, among many other impressive companies. Before getting into venture, Dave founded the RNA and machine learning company Cofactor Genomics. So Dave was doing basically TechBio before it was cool. Before that, he worked on the Human Genome Project and earned his PhD in computational biology in Stockholm. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm super excited to be here. Love the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy that you were able to make it out. One of the reasons why we actually had the thought to do this is because I put this form out about 3 to 4 weeks ago online, and Dave was the first to respond.
Yeah, you should tell people what were you asking in the form?
Yeah, so I had a whole list of things that I wanted to talk about, but I've often found that in the type of work that we do, either on the operating or the investor side, we're kind of used to having all of these typical, I guess, conversation archetypes. So talking to a founder, talking to co-investors about other deals, talking to LPs, talking to pharma. And I feel like that seldom leaves us with opportunity for critical thinking and deep, enriching conversations, the like college dorm type conversations. And, I really wanted to have some of those conversations with people that cared about it. Some of the things I listed there were like the consumerification of therapeutics. I think I mentioned something about, agents and their use in the biospace. And, you were the first to respond. I'm curious to know why you did that, or what stood out to you, because you were there within 2 minutes.
Oh my gosh! I'm glad I had good timing on this one.
Yeah,
I'm glad we were able to have this conversation. So to me, we all get into rhythms in the conversations that we have, which tends to be because we get practiced and familiar with them. That's normal and natural, I think, for everyone in their work and their life. But what I loved about your sort of call to arms was, hey, let's see if we can break out of our usual rhythms and patterns and still talk about the things that we care about and that we're passionate about, but be intentional about trying to have a more free-flowing discussion that's maybe not as practiced as usual.
Yeah, creative freedom to nerd out, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we ended up having a call after that because one of the outputs of that was to set up meetings with people who responded. And on that call, you and I kind of got this idea to do a podcast. And again, because we haven't really had another investor on the podcast before, I thought it would be cool to kind of do this new type of pod where we talk about what your fund is, what's similar to our fund investing, what's different, some of the co-investments we may have done. And I think a lot of people who listen to our podcast are probably curious about how investors interact with each other.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good opportunity to get into that. So I think we'll do that. We'll talk about what Pioneer is looking for these days, how we met, again, our similarities and differences and co-investments. But I think later on, we're also going to talk a little bit about TechBio, or as other people maybe refer to it as AI and bio, AI and drug discovery. There's so many ways to think about what this is, and maybe get a little bit more granular on those definitions and how we think about them respectively. But also talking about how your experience in being a technical founder has, shaped your perspective, because I know we've both done a lot of investing in technical founders who are leading the companies. And so maybe we'll talk a little bit about lessons we've learned there.
Let's do it.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you kick us off and tell us what Pioneer Fund is, how you got involved, and what the Future of Health Fund is gunning for these days.
Sure. So Pioneer Fund was started by one of my Y Combinator batchmates, Jason Gray. He saw YC alums angel investing in YC companies and realized, wow, YC invests in so many companies. It's hard for any one person to wrap their arms around that. Wouldn't it be great if we, as alums, banded together to do a better job of evaluating those companies and investing in them? We as founders like to support each other anyway, and being able to write a check even better. Pretty early on, and I joined pretty much right away, first as a venture partner, and then eventually as a senior venture partner and leading bio and health there. We learned pretty quickly that we had a particular expertise in the health and bio space. We had a really strong sub-community of founders, alums who were part of Pioneer Fund that had started companies in bio and health. And we also saw that this was a huge advantage because these companies are so technical, having founders who have that background in different subspecialties in science or in health, as well as having been founders, actually built companies in this space, really helped us to understand those companies and make good investments. And we saw pretty quickly that we were making some really great investments in that space and had built a great track record around that. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to double down on that strength. We have early access into great companies at YC. We have this broader access to great bio and health companies out of our founder network, now over 100 founders, as you mentioned in the intro, that have all built companies in bio and health. And so we started the Future of Health Fund. We're now on Fund 2, where we have made a number of really great investments. I'm sure we'll talk about some of them today, but really around this idea that we have this particular strength that we can support these founders as we invest in them. And that technical background that we have is so critical to understanding which companies are going to be hopefully very successful from that background.
That's exciting. And congrats on getting to Fund 2. I think maybe we'll talk about this today, but a lot of people maybe aren't as familiar with the GP journey.
Yeah.
It's similar to the founder journey in some instances. And I think it's pretty cool that you're able to continue on with this view and have access to all of those people, like you said, with expertise in these subspecialties. And I think a theme for you, probably starting with your PhD all the way through to today, is this kind of interface and song and dance between AI and bio. And, I know that there has been an ebbing and flowing of, I guess, what YC invests in. In your perspective, do you think that there have been years where YC has been more bio-focused and where maybe years they've not been? And how does that reflect, I guess, how you think about investing today? Because I was curious to know if you have a hard and fast rule to only invest in YC companies out of Pioneer's Future of Health Fund, or if you're kind of more open with that fund.
Sure. So I think it is a common perception, and I think it's actually a misperception that YC has ebbed and flowed in bio investing. So my company, Cofactor Genomics, was among the first bio companies that YC invested in. We were in 2015. Ginkgo is, of course, the sort of one of the, even earlier, one of the famous ones that's done really well. Turns out, actually, YC invested in an EHR company even earlier than that. And steadily, over the last 10 plus years, YC has been investing in roughly 10 to 15% of every batch in health and bio, broadly defined. And so there's an incredibly rich network of alums who have done very well in this space. And it hasn't been, I think, as prominent as YC's history in tech, just because YC's been doing it in tech maybe more consistently for longer. YC's 20 years old. Let's say maybe half that time has been a lot of bio investments. So, for example, my friend Ogajan founded Billion to One. They IPO'd last year, a tremendous success in that space.
Yeah, I was gonna mention them. Why do you think, and you kind of answered this already, but why do you think that misperception exists? I feel like we live in the era of sound bites and just like a lot of X threads and, a lot of PR around memes of the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe if I had to guess, and I'm curious to know if you agree with me, just AI in general, AI in tech has been it's been taking up a lot of the airwaves, basically. And I think that maybe conflated people's perception of what, investors are interested in general. And I mean, there are so many ways we can take this, but do you think that's part of it? Do you think that's probably
I think so.
why?
I think part of it is just simply because different people have different definitions of what constitutes bio and health. And YC has always been, I think, and Pioneer by extension, about finding great founders. And in the Future of Health Fund, we look at founders from everything from platform therapeutics to computational drug discovery to digital health platforms. All of those are using some of the same technologies, even though the industry is a little bit different. We tend to see companies in the bio and health space broadly as tech companies that are using a lot of the same underlying technology as the AI companies that get a lot of the headlines. But they just happen to be also curing disease along the way, right? And so I think that distinction is maybe lost on some, that the tech is often the same, even though there's an overlay of science and sometimes working in a regulated industry like health. You can still have companies that grow and scale like a SaaS company. We explicitly tend not to invest in single asset therapeutics companies that I think a lot of people associate with a bio and health fund, where a whole company is built around a single asset. It may be a binary outcome that takes 15 years and billions of dollars to reach its endpoint. That is not what we fund. We've invested in tech founders who happen to be operating in this space where we can see very short turnarounds. So Gilgamesh, as you mentioned, great example. We invested at seed 5 years ago.
Yeah.
They sold one asset to AbbVie for over $1 billion in cash last year. That was 5 years since our investment. And the best part to me is that this is a great example of a platform company where they have 4 other drugs in the pipeline. We still have a stake in the ongoing company. That is a much different time frame and outcome than I think most people think of, even though that is a therapeutics company.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many, I guess, conversations that I end up having with many different types of people around what it is that we invest in and whether or not we would be interested. I think similar to you, we think about our investments from this lens of, converging market and technological forces that are going to enable the next epic of human health, well-being, and performance. And I guess the short version of that is like the future of health, right, really. And so I think from that perspective, it might be that, and maybe we'll touch on this later, there is going to be some sort of convergence to the shape of what these companies look like. There is a gradient between using tech in the process of developing drugs that really takes on different forms that can sometimes be confusing. So that's probably why there's that misconception. But yeah, so I guess, going through our list, thinking back to how we met originally, I think people would be curious to know how these things happen. So we didn't meet because of an investment per se. Do you remember how we met?
I don't exactly. You probably remember better than me.
I actually don't. I think usually what ends up happening is deal sharing is probably one of them. But I do remember hosting like a TechBio dinner.
Yes, that's right. That's how you and I met.
In person.
Yes.
But I think we had met beforehand.
Okay.
Because I emailed you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's right. Of course. That's how I ended up there.
Yeah.
So we must have been introduced, I think it must have been around the time that we both invested in NeuroBionics.
Probably. And I think you knew Brahm before through that process.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's correct. I think I was introduced to Brahm and then we met through Brahm. And then I think we really got to know each other at that great dinner you hosted.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you for coming. But yeah, since then, the way that we tend to, I guess, communicate regularly is just like quarterly Zoom, sometimes phone calls once in a while. But yeah, so in terms of the co-investment, so NeuroBionics was, I think, the first one that we did together.
Amazing company.
Amazing company. Shout out to MJ and Nikki at NeuroBionics. For those who want to check out our podcast with them, we did a podcast with MJ and Nikki about 1.5 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, but they're not a YC company.
That's right.
So I'm curious if you want to talk about how you decided to make that investment and how often you're making investments in companies that are YC companies versus not?
Sure. So YC gets over like 12,000 applications a year just for companies in the health and bio space. They take less than 1%. And so, and like I said, it's about 10 to 15% of every batch. And so let's call it like around 150 companies a year, phenomenal companies. We have close ties to YC, and we look at all those companies. That is an incredible source of companies that we invest heavily out of because they're so good and because we have such a close relationship there. At the same time, we started the Future of Health Fund because we saw not only did we have this very deep technical expertise among these over 100 health and bio founders, we were also seeing really great companies outside of the YC ecosystem that we wanted to invest in. And the core fund at Pioneer is more squarely focused on YC. And so the fund started in part for that purpose. And we have made some of our best investments have been outside of the YC ecosystem, NeuroBionics being one, Assort Health being another. This is a company that, while there's a YC alum as a founder, they did not go through YC. And those companies we put through pretty much the same process as we do the YC ones. We are looking for the best founders who have a unique perspective on the problem they're solving. They're typically going to be technical founders who have done work in the space, and they have to be working on a problem that is massive.
Yeah.
We really gravitate towards people who see an enormous opportunity, often before other people do. And while a lot of those folks do go to YC and we meet them that way, we see a lot of great founders like Nikki and MJ who are outside of that ecosystem. And you should share a little bit, just maybe a sense or two on their company and what's so cool about NeuroBionics.
Yeah, and I think, as we talk about our 3 co-investments, we can kind of riff on why, we decided to invest, and maybe it'll shine a light on how we're similar and how we're different. But so NeuroBionics is a spin out of MIT, out of Dr. Polina Anakiva's lab, based on some kind of materials engineering, I guess, breakthrough. And essentially what they're doing is building a way to do endovascular deep brain stimulation without a craniotomy. So being able to reach the deep brain with these ultra thin, amazing fibers. I believe they are now between 1/6 and 1/8 in diameter of synchron stentrodes, so they're quite small. And they're essentially being engineered and designed to reach the deep brain through the jugular. So pretty amazing stuff. All kinds of applications, but we underwrote that from the perspective of we have this invasive neuromodulation portfolio at XEIA, and we're always looking for, like you said, founders who are uniquely qualified to execute on the idea, and also who are very familiar with the problem. And I think for us, that know-how and new, I guess, science around the materials engineering that went into this was particularly interesting from this potential to disrupt perspective. But I'm curious if you want to maybe add anything that you thought was pretty cool about them and what the problem area is.
Sure. So you're right. They had deep experience here. They came out of the lab that invented the technology. Deep brain stimulation, for those who aren't familiar, has a longer history than I realized at the time that we invested. It's still relatively nascent compared to some other types of treatments, but seems to be very effective for a range of disorders. And the challenge historically has been, you got to put a hole in your head. Nobody wants to put a hole in their head unless absolutely necessary. And so NeuroBionics being able to go through the vasculature in a much safer, less invasive way, while having the same level of effectiveness, is a huge breakthrough. And we saw that these founders were exactly what we love to see. This deeply technical, and more importantly, they were moving at a pace that I think most people would not expect to see in a deeply technical area. We routinely like to invest in folks who are moving at the pace of like a SaaS company, where they have the ability to make tremendous progress in a very short period of time with a lot less capital than you may think. And I think we invested in NeuroBionics maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. Already they've gone on to raise significant additional capital. They have advanced their technology dramatically. They're going into their next range of testing. It's the kind of thing that most people in sort of the traditional biotech world would expect to take 10 times more money and probably 5 to 10 times as long.
Yeah, I know, astounding founders. And your point about, investing in companies where whether or not they're working on a SaaS product, they operate like a SaaS company, can't be understated or can't be overstated at all, in my opinion, just because, I think that with a lot of the companies we've invested in, some of the best founders are taking these really complex biological or engineering challenges and iterating them on them quickly. And I think one of the tension points in investing in technical founders sometimes is that, especially if they have not left academia or if they've not worked in private industry, that's something they have to learn innately or maybe translate from the work that they were doing in the lab in some way. And so that those quick iterative loops are admittedly much more challenging too when you have design constraints and you have a lot of vendors or CROs working on something at the same time. And it's hard to move forward, but there are people that do it. So yeah, really excited about them. I think the other thing that was pretty shocking to me that I didn't know about DBS was that it's quite effective for Parkinson's disease patients, but only I think something like less than 1% of eligible Parkinson's patients actually go through with the surgery because of the craniotomy. You don't want a hole in your head. So huge problem, huge market. Founders that are uniquely qualified who work at breakneck speed. I mean, that seems like the formula where we kind of converge between our investment theses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I really love that you highlighted this challenge around the transition from academia to being a founder. And this is something that I think we both look for. I went through this myself as a founder. When you do research, you're typically going to be doing it and in an academic environment. We all pretty much come out of that kind of environment when you're founding companies in this space. And the things that are most valuable, the norms of academic research and development, are almost the opposite of what they are in starting a company.
Yeah.
You typically, a great example is how you talk about your work. In a classic academic lecture, it is 45 minutes. Way too long to keep most people's attention span. You talk very little about yourself and your qualifications, whereas when you're presenting your work as a founder, you really have to be comfortable sharing why you're a good person to be working on this. You tend to say very little about the great significance and potential future of your work in academia, whereas you have to communicate why this could be very valuable and disruptive as a founder.
Yeah.
And then finally, you typically, as an academic, will spend way too much time in the scientific details, which are not going to be relevant most of the time for the audience that you're communicating with as a founder. You have to be able to talk about very technical things in common language.
Yeah.
And this is a huge difference we see in the best founders, being able to talk about very complex technical things in a way that seems effortless.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because, one of the things that I see as being totally counterintuitive when you're leaving academia and starting a company is that in academia, you're rewarded to really share your thinking, to share your methods, to share your thoughts behind how you're going to arrive at an answer. Whereas in the startup world, you have 30 seconds to talk about the product you just built and why that's important. So, there's like this segment of analysis and R&D and research in academia. I wouldn't even call it R&D, but just like real pure science and an inquiry. And then you have translation, which can happen in academia or outside of it. But then the productization part, I think that's a place where there's a bigger learning curve that I have seen. But there are qualities that I think people who are rigorously trained in the scientific method actually have that make them uniquely capable of productizing quickly if they just lock into the right formula quickly. It's like you're so used to asking for money all the time, running out of money, needing to reinvent the problem, and I think without realizing it, it's a skill set that can be transferable, but if the lens is shifted a little bit. Do you feel that way?
Completely agree. This actually comes up from time to time, right? This tension between the way that you talk about the work and the public perception of that. We've seen this on Twitter before, right? Where somebody will talk in broader strokes and maybe simplify the science in order to communicate more effectively. And traditional folks who maybe are more from an academic tradition will react badly to this and cry foul and say, oh, they're making claims that they can't possibly be true.
Yeah.
And I think while sometimes there is certainly hyperbole, I think the broader point is maybe being missed. It's easy and in fact sometimes encouraged in academia to be critical of other people's work. And I think that is a negative impulse generally. It's certainly helpful to ground things in reality, but it is important to be able to communicate about the potential of the work. And sometimes the way that you are able to do that is with language that is not scientific jargon.
It's not specific language,
right,
but it's translating. That communication piece is so important because I think one of the hard realities that hit a lot of the founders that I've talked to, either in our portfolio or not, is that the job of running the company is so much about talking to investors and getting investors excited. And you're not going to be able to translate to every investor in the same way. You need to be able to code switch. And I also think there's we're in the Bay Area, and so there is I guess, a concentration of investors who are familiar with bio and tech and AI. But in the grand scheme of things, this is not, I think there maybe is an assumption that every investor knows exactly what AI and bio is and why they should be excited about it. But it's actually on the onus of the founders to explain that, which goes back to what you just said. Like sometimes it sounds like hyperbole, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just broader communication to get to the point of what this could do for the world.
Right. And to be clear, we love to go deep technically with founders.
Yeah.
We have a practice of reading their research papers and really trying to understand their work as scientists before we ever talk to the founders, so that when we talk to them, we can really go deep. And it's a huge compliment to us when founders will say, wow, I love that you've got 3 people on this call who have done work in this area and have read our papers. So that's a huge part of our process of evaluation, being able to really uncover those corners of the work and make sure we understand it at a fundamental level. But I would not expect them to be having that same conversation as their headline story that they're sharing more generally. I think you're so right that communication, whether it's to investors or to the public, or simply just being able to talk about your work in a way that allows you to share your passion and your excitement for this amazing thing that you're doing. That's a huge part of being a successful founder.
I agree with you completely. I think, in talking about our similarities, we have erred on the side of being quite critical as well with the science. But again, I think some of the lessons we've learned is that the founders that stand out really have both. They have the ability to communicate in both languages. And, I think maybe continuing through to talk about some of our co-investments and how our funds might be different.
Yeah.
Kerna Labs is a good example of a company where we, I think, have totally different views on, I guess, we had totally different lenses with which we were, I guess, evaluating them. Maybe not, but I know that you've done a lot more investing in the SaaS space and in the health tech space, and you're thinking about platform TechBio in a way that might be slightly different than the way that we're thinking about it. So, do you wanna do the intro for Kerna?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'll say a bit, and then please fill in as well. So I met Amit first, actually, through a friend of mine who is in this space. And we had a great conversation about his company and the work that he had done actually at a previous company. And a lot of it had to do with RNA, which is a huge part of my history. I was working on RNA even back on the Human Genome Project, and then the company I founded was an RNA and machine learning company. And it was very exciting to hear about the work that they had done on understanding how to use RNA for therapeutics. This is a big challenge in really translating the complexities of RNA sequence into a platform for developing new drugs. And Amit had an incredible background for this. He had already built a version of this at the company he had previously worked at. And so already that's kind of hitting on a few of the things that I look for. So somebody with deep experience, they'd done a version of this before. You learn a lot when you build something. And so when you're doing the second or maybe third iteration or 10th iteration of it, you're probably going to be uncovering some of the challenges, and your latest version is going to account for those. As well, I think he was very much directed on how this is actually meeting challenges that he saw in pharma.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about Kerna attracted you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think Brahm met Amit at the Foresight Vision Weekend in 24 or 23. I'm not sure. I think it was 23. And he hadn't started the company yet, but we knew immediately that we wanted to invest. And so as soon as we could, I think we were the first check into Kerna because we were just like, got to invest in this guy. I think the thing that was really interesting to us about it is, firstly, we were really interested in RNA as a modality. I think that, if you look at our portfolio, we've done several investments in the RNA space as well. But, the level of information and knowledge that Amit had when speaking about bio, but then also when speaking about like product development from a tech perspective was so equal and balanced that it felt like a good move. And at the time, I was also thinking about tech bio or AI in bio, whatever we want to call it, in the context of modality optimization. Because, on the pharma side of things, the shapes of deals that different companies can do with pharma are mainly driven by the value that they can add. And when you're doing modality optimization, mRNA sequence optimization, the world is kind of your oyster. If you can go pan-therapeutic area, those co-development deals or those whatever deals that you do with pharma are just amplified 10, 20x, however much, once you build those capabilities in-house. And so that's about the time when we started to think more deeply about the shapes of transactions that can scale the value of companies that are leveraging tech in a bio sense. And I think on the flip side of that, the platform version is basically develop your own drugs. And a lot of companies actually switch back and forth. But I think having that balanced knowledge and know-how on the team of tech and bio was super exciting.
Agreed. And this is a great example of why computational approaches in the life sciences are so powerful. When I started my career, there were not nearly as many people who were using computers to solve challenges in biology and medicine as there are today. And in fact, it would be, I think, an exception today to have scientists working in this space who don't have computational fluency. Just as all of us really use computers every day, it's a natural part of being a scientist today is to use computers. That wasn't necessarily the case 20 years ago. In the same way, we see AI as a new technology that is helping us to use computers more effectively to understand science and medicine. It will very quickly, I think, be the exception that we have companies in the life sciences that are not using AI in some form. It's just such a fundamental technology. One way I think about tech companies in the life sciences is that they are building a fundamental technology that can be applied broadly, like Kerna is, which gives such freedom and optionality to apply that in the best way and in multiple iterations. And so, again, the traditional thinking, I think, around biotech investments is you're betting the farm on one shot. That is not what tech companies in the life sciences do today, not the ones that you and I tend to invest in, where you have multiple at-bats and you have the ability to have multiple ways of creating value, whether it's with your own programs or different partners that in pharma that you make agreements with. And Kerna is a great example of that, where the core technology is just so critical to why we are excited about them.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that the ex-chief scientific officer of Moderna, Melissa Moore, joined as scientific co-founder shortly after we invested, which was also a very strong signal.
Yes.
I think that one area that I feel like we maybe differ a little bit in is that where, we totally agree with what you're saying and this ability to kind of iterate and also apply the platform more broadly to drive the revenues. We have historically, and I'm not saying this is the correct way, nor am I saying is this the way we're going to go in the future, to be honest, but we've historically been also simultaneously very focused on unique biological problems that we believe like chemistry has the ability to solve in some way. So sometimes that actually constrains the purview of a company if they're solving a unique indication or a unique problem biologically that maybe isn't as generalizable across therapeutic areas. We've tended to do a lot of neuro. I think that's totally an area that we maybe differ in.
That's true. I think, you do definitely have a more discrete focus in that space. At the same time, what a space to focus on. There's so much opportunity in neuro. I remember when I first studied neuroscience a long time ago, the tools were much more limited than what we have today. It was much harder to make scientific advances and technical advances in the space than today, where we have a huge opportunity to make progress there over the next decade that we haven't. And these are very common and debilitating disorders that pretty much all of us have had some interaction with, whether it's with family or friends. So we all know the huge opportunity there. And I think it makes perfect sense that you would put a lot of effort into trying to advance companies that are solving challenges there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, Brahm and I have both been biased towards neuro for various reasons. And I honestly think that now is the time to leverage all of this new tech to solve some of these complex problems. We're going to need to continue on with basic research in academia too. Like, we don't really know a lot about the brain at all. So, I think I'm very enthusiastic that I'm seeing a return to neuroscience within the big pharma franchises, and I think it's going to remain that way. But that being said, a lot of breakthroughs and a lot of blockbuster drugs are, as we're now finding out, very useful for healthspan more generally, like the GLP-1s, originally developed for diabetes, and now it's been being used ubiquitously for obesity and weight loss, but now also even more so for just general lifestyle. It turns out that it has some pretty interesting effects on the brain. And so, I think being a little bit more open to this holistic view, and maybe we'll talk about this later, around the consumerification or lifestyleification of these drugs, we might find that as we put ownership into the hands of the patients more and more about their health and what medicines they can use, that, being empowered to figure out ways in which they can leverage, the benefits of certain therapeutics for themselves that maybe they weren't originally designed for. I think we're moving in that era. We can talk a little bit about that later, but yeah, I agree with what you said. And, I think one company, and so we've done neuro, but we've done a lot of these like pure play tech bio platforms. And I think that's like our last co-investment. Our most recent one of these is a super stealth company. So we can't say anything about it. Maybe you'll hear about them soon. But I guess the one thing to point out is that this is someone with an immense track record of building a tech bio company, a multi-billion-dollar tech bio company, and operating it at the helm for over a decade.
Yeah, super excited about that. I can't wait until we can speak about that one publicly, because it's a great example of the kind of founder where, this is somebody we've known for 10 years, a huge fan of the previous company that he built. And when he started talking about some of the learnings from that company and why he was excited to start a new one, we were very excited to get in and join that effort. So more to come on that. There are, and actually we made another investment, one that I can't talk about publicly, in the neurospace actually last year, that followed a similar trajectory. So our friend Jack O'Meara, who had previously founded Ochre Bio, a tremendous company, when he started talking about a new company to go after neurodegenerative disorders, I was very excited to hear about his plans for that and have the opportunity to invest in that company last year. He's already gone on to raise significant capital towards that effort and advance the company a lot in just, I think, 12 months since we wrote an early check into that. And that pattern of seeing successful repeat founders who have already demonstrated deep technical acumen as well as the ability to build a successful company, it's the kind of thing that is a strong signal to us when we look to invest.
Yeah, I mean, the ability to keep pace. I think that's one of the things that I talk about a lot with people who are thinking about becoming founders, is just like the need to really understand the pace at which you need to move to keep the investors interested, but also to be conscientious enough of the time you need to build a real product that is helpful and useful. So
yeah,
I think I met Jack when we were at an event in Boston.
Okay,
actually.
right on.
I don't know if you remember going to that event.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. We were both
cool.
at that. That was great. I think and what you said about pace is such a critical thing. I think not just because when you're running a company, typically pre-revenue, time is your most important measure. The faster you can iterate, the more opportunities you have to advance whatever it is you're doing. And when we see people who are able to move faster than seemingly possible, that's such a strong signal. And both of us tend to invest in companies early. And I know that some other folks are surprised that we can get enough signal that early. And the reality is that when somebody is moving fast, you don't need to be seeing their rate of progress over a very long period of time to be able to see substantial progress. And so that's something that can stand out even in a company that's just a few months old. Yeah,
to double click on what you said, a lot of the time when I'm explaining how we get conviction so early, it's like you're really underwriting the team at that point. Obviously, there's a lot of technical diligence you have to do on what they've built so far and the assumptions around the scientific leaps of faith, as I call them, that they're taking. But ultimately, if you can get a feel for how someone works and how they think, it should be the case that you should build some conviction around their ability to recognize opportunities and not necessarily pivot, but shape their product accordingly. And I think, some of what I've done in the past with some of our founders is basically they send me their deck and I write a memo. Even sometimes I've done this when we don't invest, and I work on the memo with the founder for half a day asynchronously on comments, just so that I can see how they think about things. And that's been a really good gauge for understanding how they're going to move in the future. So, but yeah, before we continue, I just, in thinking about all of this, I have to ask about your time on the Human Genome Project, because that is obviously a revolutionary project that just changed the game for so many reasons. And I think, having been there and literally done that, and now kind of moving into this era of the future of health, do you feel like we need more human genome projects to be substrate for future product development? Yeah. So the short answer is yes, I think, and they are actually happening in a different way maybe than the Human Genome Project did. So I'd love to share a little bit about what that was like. For me, I was very lucky in spending time with a mentor. I spent a summer with a man named Ross Overbeek, who is a computational math and computer science guy who had started working on biological problems. And that was around the time that Craig Venter's group, which was then at the NIH, sequenced the first genome of a free living organism, which is an archaea.
And Ross saw even then, he asked the question, what would it be like when we don't have just one genome sequence, but we have thousands or even millions, and not just of one species, but of all species? That was a very significant moment for me. I realized that would really set the pace for the coming decades of science. And I immediately tried to find other people who were interested in that, and went down to St. Louis to join WashU, where Bob Watterson was helping to lead the public effort on the Human Genome Project. It was important not just for the output, but also for the approach. So it was, in hindsight, or maybe people don't realize that it was somewhat controversial at the time to spend $3 billion on that project. There were a lot of even other scientists in the life sciences who believed that it was not a good use of money. But Bob saw very clearly that this was going to be an important resource, and it certainly has been. But I love the fact that it was science at scale.
Yeah.
It was really taking a more of a startup approach really to building. It was international and collaborative. And they knew when they started that they would, in order to be able to finish it, they would have to invent new technology along the way, which is very much the kind of thing that we invest in TechBio. And they were successful at that. And then we saw the wave of next-gen sequencers come after that. The Human Genome Project was not done on massively parallel next-gen sequencers. It was, slab gels, which I spent a lot of time loading when I was part of that.
Yeah.
And I think the output of the Human Genome Project is not just the resource itself, the human genome, which has allowed us to understand, human biology in a way that we haven't, because it gives us the complete parts list, right? So you have to remember before the Human Genome Project, when we would try to understand a facet of biology, say a particular pathway, we didn't know what the limits were of what could possibly be involved in that. And now that we know the sort of the finite space in which we have to search genetically, that's a huge advantage, as well as being able to compare across species. But I think that was just a critical moment for me to be able to see not only how to perform science at a very high scale, but also to be going into something knowing that you have to create new technology.
Yeah, and what an astounding exemplar of what pre-competitive collaborative consortiums can do. I mean, I think you mentioned the new technology that came out of the project. So obviously you mentioned getting this parts list, but the new technology, the substrate for new technology, and also just a new perspective is pretty valuable, I think, in the grand scheme of things. And obviously one of the commonly cited successes out of this, I guess retrospectively, is that it's brought the cost of sequencing down through the people that kind of moved on with new technological development. And to think that today we could just, spit in a tube and, even use an LLM to figure out how to work with our raw genome at home is pretty wild, isn't it?
Yeah. In fact, I did that a couple of weeks ago. There was a discussion in one of the chat groups I'm in about, do we really need 23andMe or not that specific, but an outside service to help us evaluate our genome? Is it important to have this clinically done? And out of curiosity, I was like, I have a copy of my own genome, which I did actually for a very specific reason, because of some family history that I couldn't access through just one of the SNP panels. And so I spent an afternoon working with one of the LLMs to try to understand that a little bit better based on what is currently known, and was actually able to come up with some new recommendations that I've shared with my doctor.
Amazing.
Which, was a nice unexpected outcome from that. It was mostly just out of sort of intellectual curiosity, and it actually has been meaningful in trying to make sure that I'm medically doing the right thing personally.
That's amazing. Which LLM did you use?
I used Claude.
Okay, I had a feeling.
Actually, I suppose we could do the same thing with any of them.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to see how much you can do just with some, with some using planning mode and using some of the latest technology to just do that investigation. Which I used to do professionally.
Yeah.
On the command line, writing code to do that kind of analysis.
Oh man. I mean, I guess one of the things that I think about is once this way of working, if you will, is fully, being used ubiquitously, I would be more concerned that we don't have enough genetic counselors to interpret like things like polygenic risk scores appropriately. And there's a whole other conversation there about some of these reproductive health companies that we could get into.
Right.
But
well, there is this tension, right? So, is it appropriate for and helpful for somebody who is not trained in the field to be trying to understand their health with the help of an LLM? And my belief is that in general, giving people the ability to do more, as much as they want, is a positive thing.
Yeah.
There is, I would also, and myself included, always seek the counsel of people who have spent more time understanding something than I have, rather than making important decisions based on just a direct interaction with that. But this is a technology. It can be used, in a very powerful way, and that can be positive, and there can also be some negative consequences of that. And so I don't think it's an all or nothing, black or white situation.
Yeah.
How do you think about it?
I couldn't agree more with you regarding giving everyone the ability to know as much about themselves as possible. I think that where I'm hoping that things go is in the direction of empowering people to be more interested in their own health, which I think is what's happening. I think this access to technology, access to information, but also the direct-to-consumer model that we're seeing a lot of like concierge medicine companies take ultimately is a net positive thing. I'm seeing more people who I'm related to that are not from the coastal cities, taking more interest in their health because they have more information. And I also think it makes for more meaningful and productive discourse with clinicians too.
Absolutely.
I was very surprised. My GP at UCSF, when I told him that I had like a blood-based biomarker panel of like 100 plus from one of these companies, he was like, great, send it to me.
Yeah.
And he like totally integrated it into what he was doing. It makes their job easier. And I think it totally depends on the health system. But if we're moving to reducing healthcare burdens on larger systems and reducing the cost of disease, it starts by being proactive and prophylactic. So I'm excited about that.
I'm very excited about this consumerization of health. I do think that it will be possible for it to be much easier to access rather than having to sort of manually talk to an LLM about your genome. And I think there are companies doing this. I think one of the things which has been a challenge in the consumer space is having a repeatable long-term business model.
Yeah.
We see companies which are enabling people to access biomarker testing in a way that wasn't as easy just a couple of years ago. We've looked at these companies. I've run the panels, on myself, and I think that because these are typically self-pay, it's harder to convince people to keep coming back.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm really interested in is companies which are trying to provide this kind of direct-to-consumer model while also figuring out how to integrate it into the insurance pay system that is dominant in the U.S. And we've invested in a company recently that has an angle on, actually a couple of companies that have an angle on this. So this is, I think, one of the really interesting ways to sort of square that circle where you can have the consumer app, you can give all that power to the person, but you can also make it a business that's sustainable by working within the the financial approach that we have here.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are HSA eligible right now, which, that's not covered by insurance. But I think you're right that, as these companies can work to get the tests covered, but also the solutions provided and the I guess integration of the information is kind of there to interact with the individual. That's great. I know Quest and LabCorp are also offering their own versions of these now, even though they are the vendor that is doing it for these companies too. And I think ultimately, once the cost comes down for consumers to use these other companies that are not Quest and LabCorp, I think the advantage that they'll have is just the longitudinal engagement over time. And, it's not just a vendor or service provider. I worry about sometimes, us getting ahead of ourselves in the Bay. There's a very small percentage of people that are able to kind of interact with all of these different services and gain access to this information right now. And I feel like it would be more useful if, everyone could be doing that. And I don't think there's a huge population right now that's utilizing these services, at least as much as there could be.
Agreed. And I think that one of the things we'll see is that as these products mature, they'll become much more widely available. One of the non-obvious side benefits, I'd say, of AI in health, particularly on the digital health end, and is that it enables us to have much more positive experiences with the healthcare, with our healthcare journeys. All of us, I think, have experienced frustration, whether we're just patients or whether we're also on the provider side, because there's a lot of accumulated challenges and friction there. One of the things that's amazing is that we can now start to see companies that are helping doctors to spend more time with their patients and patients spending less frustrating time on hold. Like one of our portfolio companies, Assort Health, is sort of sits this layer between patients and their doctors and specialty clinics. It's great for the patients. They no longer have to wait on hold to be able to get help. They can call anytime, day or night, in any of a couple dozen languages. But it's also great for the doctors and nurses on the other side, where they don't need to have a specialist training for the people answering the phone to be able to help these patients. That can all be taken care of with AI. And that's a company that has grown extremely fast in just a couple of years since we invested early, that is making a huge impact on both sides of that coin, for both doctors and for patients.
Yeah, to your point, before we kind of end this topic, I didn't realize how many gaps existed in the logistics and infrastructure of care delivery until I went to the health conference in Vegas, I think last November or 2 Novembers ago. And there were all these companies, which to my very untrained eye, who is used to looking at therapeutics all the time, I'm like, these all kind of sound the same. It's like these tech companies are health tech companies that are trying to solve one very specific area of reimbursement or dealing with the payers or interfacing between clinicians and patients in one context. But then upon further inspection, I realized that there's a whole slew of problems that exist still that make that process so rigid and laden with this administrative dread on both ends that takes the point out of actually seeing a healthcare provider in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and Assort Health is a great example of this. They're what I see them as a very sophisticated tech company operating in the healthcare space. They've grown phenomenally. They're close to a Series B already, led by Lightspeed. So it's been a great investment. But they have actually solved a really significant problem that, it's crazy that in 2026, most of us, when we're interacting with our doctor's offices, it's still primarily through the telephone. It seems crazy, but it's true.
One area where I hope we see this consumerification or I guess just at home or autonomous healthcare journey type stuff goes. One area where I hope this goes is at home testing. So there's this company called SiPhox. Have you looked at them before?
Yes.
Okay. I did the little workup at Health, and I was like, wow, it would be so amazing if we could have on-demand at-home like biomarker analysis for whatever it is. And the unit economics, I think, are what is challenging there in terms of manufacturing. But I just learned that I've like developed borderline anemia from being a runner. And I would love to be able to like look at my iron levels at any given time at home on demand. And I'm sure there are, engineering and chemical constraints. But if the unit economics come down enough, I'm pretty sure most people would want to have something like that at home. So
absolutely, and phenomenal founder leading that company. And I think you're right. I think that sort of model where somebody like you who has an avid runner wants to be able to monitor that much more easily, but just doing it at home. There are other applications for other folks with, say, chronic illnesses where that's going to be relevant. That sort of technology, I think, is as a taste of sort of what's to come.
Yeah, quite frankly, I think for me it would be more, let me see if I have exceptionally low iron today, so I feel better about not doing my run. But
right.
So we've talked about a lot of things. And I think the theme that keeps coming back is this using of technology in the life sciences. And I want to talk a little bit to kind of end the conversation about AI and bio, AI and drug discovery, TechBio, what it was, what it is, what it's morphing into, and where you think the future of investing in this space is going to converge.
Yep. So the headline for me is that AI may have its most significant impact in health and medicine. And I know that's a large statement to make, considering the large impact that we are seeing or people predict AI will have in work and in the tech world in general. But I think this for a couple of reasons. One, the healthcare space is massive. In 2025, healthcare spend in the US was $5 trillion. And about $2 trillion of that is the administrative kind of overhead piece. And that is something that AI can make a large impact on today and in the very near future. And so we see a huge opportunity to invest in tech companies that are taking advantage of AI's ability to process a lot of data and very quickly and efficiently. But more broadly, I think we see great opportunity for AI in health and medicine because we have this convergence of an exponential growth in data. We talked about the Human Genome Project and the exponential growth in sequencing data over the last, let's call it 20, 25 years. We're seeing that same thing happen with medical records, our ability to exponentially access medical records today is much different than it was before. In addition, we have way more people who are using computers and AI to study health and medicine today than we had in the past. And now you layer on the transformer models, the LLM AI technology. All of those things together are a significant difference.
That was me.
No worries. So we have. So we have this intersection of way more data available, both omics data and healthcare data available than ever before. We have way more people working to use computational approaches in health and medicine. And then you have this accelerant of AI and transformer models, which allow us to do way more than we could ever do before. One way I think about it is the amount of time that it used to take to be an expert in one area of biology or medicine. You could spend a career becoming an expert in one particular gene or pathway. You would read all the papers, you'd know all the labs working on it, and you'd have this very rich mental model of that particular tiny area of biology and could understand where to move that field forward. And And what is AI really, really great at? It's helping us synthesize large amounts of information into a rich model. And so that sort of thing, I think, will be an accelerant to our ability to have tremendous progress in both the biology, the health side of it, and the medicine side in the next decade.
Yeah, I agree. I was listening to a podcast with Ray Kurzweil, and I haven't read any of his books, but I think he was juxtaposing like the optimistic utopian and dystopian views of AI and where we're going to end up as a society. And in the event that, in his view, all jobs are taken, the one problem that he believes will still exist is human biology. Anything with organic material, anything that we're trying to manipulate that is made up of cells will still be very much unsolved. And so maybe we'll live in a society where everybody is working in AI and medicine or AI and bio. Do you think that, so I guess I'm curious to know what you think the shape of companies you're going to see succeed in the next 10 years are, but also I've heard a lot of investors talking about how data generation in bio is going to be so important. And like, is that more for like a focused research organization or like a human genome project type thing? Or do you think a business can be made out of data generation alone?
Yep. So one of the things that we see as a great model for a company today is a close feedback loop between the compute, the computational models, and the experiments in the wet lab. And so traditionally, right, you've seen this kind of ebb and flow where the bottleneck is in biology. For a long time, it was on the data side where we needed way more data, and things like the sequencing revolution gave us tons and tons of data. And so then the bottleneck shifted back to the experimentation side. And it was trying to test hypotheses based on all that data. And now we're starting to see that shift go back again, where there's a lot of data that people want to be able to generate. And so the clear solution to this, to me, is to simply have a tighter and tighter feedback loop between the two. We've actually invested in companies that have done this. Oleo Labs is one of my favorites that's done this, where you have, they built a computational model predicting which drugs could be more effective in tackling obesity than the leading GLP-1s. So they built this computational prediction. They then tested that prediction in mice and showed that the prediction was almost completely correct. This new combination would be more effective and have fewer side effects. And they did this in the first 3 months of the company. And they've gone on to build a whole system where they can make predictions, test them in mice. Those predictions then feed back into the computational model, and so on and so on. And so that is a model, I think, that will work for lots of different companies and at different scales. We see this emphasis on foundational models where you want to generate a lot of data to have a rich understanding where you can then make predictions about, say, how humans will respond to a drug before you ever run a clinical trial. That is absolutely going to be a valuable approach, but there is still a lot of biology that we don't know. And so you will have to run lots of experiments to help enrich those computational models. And I expect that they're going to be relatively specialized, as opposed to the way that we tend to think of AI today as sort of, Claude or ChatGPT and these massive general models. I think we're going to see a lot of specialized models that do better in specific areas for specific problems.
Yeah, and I think first movers in these specialty areas are really going to be, I mean, that's obviously something we hear all the time, but especially in this instance, like the more of a head start you have, the more training data that you generate yourself and that is yours, the more valuable your predictions will be. I think one of the things that might end up happening in this specialization, I guess, if you will, is I think that we're going to see a lot more smaller companies wholly owning therapeutics all the way through to approval. I think that a lot of the platform TechBio companies, so meaning companies that maybe have some sort of either prediction engine or drug discovery tool that's leveraging AI, but is also developing their own therapeutics. I think, the conversation now is like, how do we move from a sponsored research agreement with pharma that uses our platform for their drugs to co-development deals or them licensing our drugs? I think eventually, once the cost and time to, doing that coin flip in humans is reduced, maybe thanks to all these other companies that are working on this problem, or maybe, everyone in tandem, I think eventually we're going to have companies retaining those assets for longer, and we might see a lot more satellite mid-sized pharma companies crop up in the next 10 to 15 years because of that. Because I think there's still a fundamental tension between how later stage investors underwrite companies that are basically doing partnerships with pharma. Mm-hmm. And so that's a whole other conversation. But you had mentioned to me before we started the podcast that you think you're going to see a lot more SaaS-based companies. So I'd be curious, I guess, before we end here, to get your hot take on that.
Yeah. So as we've talked about, we invest in founders across the range of health and life sciences. And so that means that we invest in tech bio platform companies, we invest in therapeutics companies, we invest in formulation companies, but we also invest in companies that are more on this sort of care delivery end. And this massive administrative component of the $5 trillion in annual healthcare spend, I think, is where we're going to see a lot of success in the near term, because those companies can grow and scale like a SaaS company. Mm-hmm. So I think there's this secret that maybe people have not quite realized yet, where you can build a company that operates in a regulated space like healthcare, and assisting regulated healthcare entities without having a huge regulatory burden yourself. So, you don't have to have any FDA approvals to operate a company there. Yes, you need strong HIPAA protection and high trust protection and cybersecurity protection, because you're dealing with healthcare data like any healthcare entity. But that is all in software, and you can grow and scale just like a SaaS company. And because there is so much inefficiency in the healthcare space, where, for a lot of it, you're still operating on a manual basis, you're still picking up the phone to call an insurance company to process a claim or try to reverse a denied claim. Those are all things which are near-term opportunities that are already being solved by AI native companies. And so we see this interesting spectrum where you can have companies growing very rapidly in that space and producing a huge impact in care delivery and making it more efficient, while at the same time, some of the same fundamental technologies are being used to help discover new medicines, mm-hmm. or to do the sort of the less talked about problems in drug formulation or modality optimization.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff is happening at the same time.
Yeah. I'd imagine that a lot of these, infrastructure companies that we're kind of talking about here would be even like more successful, or like, I guess an extension of their success would be in emerging markets geographically, where there is actually a larger gap in some regions that aren't as up to speed with new tech and healthcare delivery as we are here in North America and other parts of the world. I think getting everyone on the same page is going to be a huge opportunity.
It's a huge democratizing effect.
Yeah.
And I saw this when I was running the clinical trial for my company when I was a founder, where we would see clinics in poorer areas where they had patients that would be eligible for a trial, and they were very much interested in accessing the latest technology, but they were more limited in their ability to access those because, as a smaller operation, with limited staffing and limited budgets, it was harder for them to do than, say, if you were at a tier one research university where they were a much larger enterprise and could amortize those costs better.
Yeah.
These are the kinds of things that will be possible much more easily in the near term because the cost of being a clinical trial center will be much lower.
Yeah.
And so even if you're in a rural area, you can enroll your patients, or patients can have access to that. And I think it will also be true outside of the U.S.
Yeah, that's going to be great. Well, I got to ask this last question here, because you've done a lot of the therapeutics investing and platform biotech, but also these B2B, or like just SaaS type companies in general. What has been better in terms of fund performance and just like your return overall?
Yeah. So we've done quite well in terms of fund performance. We're very proud of the track record we've built. And I think what is maybe unexpected for folks is that we have seen great outcomes on both ends of the spectrum of what we invest in. We talked earlier about Gilgamesh, which had an over $1 billion cash exit last year, 5 years after we invested at seed. That is a therapeutics company, very much the kind of thing that we love to invest in, where it's a platform. A lot of people would not expect that you can have such a large outcome from a hardcore therapeutics company so quickly. On the other end of the spectrum, we've seen Assort Health grow massively. We were one of the early investors at seed. I think they're going to be a unicorn this year.
That's
and
amazing.
Just maybe less than 3 years after they started the company and we invested. And this kind of thing is partly why we have built a fund where we can invest broadly, where we see the best founders with that unique expertise solving massive problems. We want to invest in people who can move very fast, build tech companies, whether they're on the hardcore science end or on the more the SaaS end, because all of those companies have the ability to be creating tremendous value, and there's a huge universe of possibilities out there. And so we want to be able to invest in all of them no matter where they're at.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're a tech investor and you're listening and you think that you need to invest in all the tech companies for, the best upside opportunity out there, I would, encourage you to consider investing in healthcare and bio, because the future of health is near.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. So, Dave, where can founders find you? How can they connect with you if they think they have something that you'd be interested in?
Sure. You can find me, we're at health.pioneerfund.vc. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I don't think I want to give out my email address.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
But easy to find me. Thanks so much. Would love to talk.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks again for being so open about having these conversations, both on the podcast and outside of the pod. I'm excited to see what we co-invest in together in the future.
Me too.
All right.
Thanks, Sam.
Take care.